We are approaching the Genshin Impact 3.1 update, and as always, more characters to break our banks. How's it going, everyone? This is Kay, and we have two new Cyno characters. Cyno and Nilou will be out, and both characters look awesome and fun to play. Returning characters are the great Anemo Archon himself, Venti, and the Chief Alchemist, Albedo. So, with 4 characters being released and with limited fates and gems, who should you pull for? I'll go over each character's strengths, weaknesses, and then rank them in terms of priorities. So, starting off with the better wolf boy, sorry Razor, Cyno is the character that relies on a burst state to deal damage, which will be his primary function. If you ever used Zhao, Ito, or even Razor, it's similar. With that, some strengths and weaknesses will apply. Cyno will be your main DPS character, and you'll build a team around him. Since Aggravate is a great reaction that really improved Electro characters, Dendro allies will be vital, and guess what? We all have a great Dendro enabler. On top of that, he of course can use other reactions like Overload and Electro Charge, so despite his main reaction being Aggravate, just know that you can have fun with other reactions, except Superconduct. He's not really meant for that. Some issues you'll encounter is that energy becomes very important, because what's the use of an elemental burst focused character if they can't use their burst? Thankfully, Cyno has somewhat of a good solution. In his burst state, the E-skill cooldown will be reduced to a mere 3 seconds, which means he can generate energy while in his burst state. Depending on his ER, this doesn't mean it'll solve everything, but it'll certainly help. Having a second Electro character will aid with recharge if that's a problem. More issues players brought up about Cyno is that his burst uptime is too long. The reason why it can be a problem is because most support buffs do not last 18 seconds per rotation, so it'll mean you'll lose out on some damage towards the end of his burst time. Now, you can manually end his burst, let's say at 12 to 15 seconds, but he does have a longer cooldown, so you'll have to wait a few seconds before reactivating his burst. A few seconds isn't all too bad, but a lot of players want to maximize time, especially for Abyss, where a few seconds saved per rotation can give you that 3-star completion. During his cooldown, you can also rotate to your other characters to do whatever you need, but the main issue about Cyno having a long burst duration isn't exactly about the time. Again, you can manually end it whenever you want. The issue with it is how Hoyoverse scales his multipliers and balances the ability. Because he has a longer duration, damage numbers are generally lower, energy costs more, and cooldown is slightly longer. For many players, they prefer a shorter burst time to synergize with the duration of support buffs, and by having a shorter burst duration for Cyno, again, Hoyoverse will balance the skill, which would mean higher damage, shorter cooldown, and lower energy costs. Essentially, the full 18 seconds is not necessary, and people would rather sacrifice a little duration for higher numbers and other reasons I mentioned. Next is Nilou, who, if I'm being honest, looks really fun to play in the game. She does have her problems, but let's talk about her role. Nilou is specifically built to be a Hydro enabler for bloom reactions. She has the unique E-skill where you can infuse her attacks with Hydro for DPS plays, or have her leave a ring that will consistently inflict Hydro status to enemies, which lets you swap her out for someone else. Again, her primary role is to help trigger bloom reactions, which will lead to generating specialized bountiful cores, and that is how you'll deal massive damage, because those cores will explode real fast all over the place. This includes you getting hits too, so having a healer is required, unless you don't mind having your characters die, that is. Then again, you're not taking that much damage, but still, having a healer is still recommended. Nilou's biggest problem is that in order to utilize the special blooms, you're strictly locked into a Hydro Dendro team, which is required by her passive. This means no Cryo character for bloom and freeze reactions, or any Anemo characters for assist and grouping. Don't get me wrong, she's meant to function without them, but being locked into only 2 elements puts unwanted restrictions on her. With limited Dendro allies, there's also aren't a lot of options to choose from, at least for now. But despite being locked into a specific team, you can technically use her outside Hydro Dendro. She's a powerful Hydro enabler, and you can use her for other reactions with other elemental teams. It's just her main role damage and contribution will not be used. Moving on to everyone's favorite bard, Venti is a sub-DPS who excels in reaction teams and is amazing in crowd control. Correction, he is the best CC character to use. Many of his strengths relies on his burst, which is very spammable thanks to his ER bonus stats. This means he's relatively easy to build. What makes Venti an amazing ally is his quick swap speed. You literally toss his E, then Q, then switch. Build time is really important for quick swaps, which is why many players prefer Fischl over Miko as an example. The speed in which a character can do their thing and then just leave is really important, and Venti is among the fastest. Now, a big reason why Venti is overall great is his travel ability, more specifically holding his E to shoot up into the air. The game isn't all about combat, and exploration is one of Genshin's biggest highlights. Don't underestimate his wind currents, as it'll make traveling cliffs a lot easier. Venti, like all characters, does have his issues. Boss battles and big enemies aren't favorable since his burst cannot suck them in. Bosses can take damage, but if they move away from the vortex, which they usually do, then it'll render his burst useless. Basically, if any enemies cannot be pulled in, then Venti's overall potential drops. Another issue in regards to his burst is that his vortex can lift enemies out of other characters' reach since enemies float mid-air. This is the reason why a lot of players don't increase Venti's level to prevent enemies from lifting too high. But overall, Venti is not meant for every single situation in battle, but he offers a lot in terms of combat and exploration. Finally, we have Albedo, who is a great sub-DPS character. If you have his Spindle Sword from the event, then you're looking at a bare minimum of 15k crit damage if you have a shit build like me, to numbers approaching 30,000 per E-tick every 2 seconds with strong team members and substats. I mean, that's pretty damn good. His skill cooldown is also very low, so it's basically 100% uptime unless the construct gets destroyed. But Albedo can also increase EM for everyone when using his burst. That's great, especially where Genshin is moving towards EM stats. What makes Albedo very strong is he's similar to Venti. He's a quick swap character. Tap E, then Q, then switch out. Field presence is very low, which makes Harbinger of the Dawn an excellent free-to-play weapon for him. Just be aware of corrosion since that will really hurt him. He can also fit into any team because of the EM buff, shield generate from the shards, and the constant geo damage from his skill. Albedo, however, will excel by having another geo character on the team for that element's resonance, even better in geo mono teams. There are also strong supports in the game already, such as Goro and Zhongli. Some problems you'll run into is that his E skill is a geo structure basically, which can be destroyed. This can cause issues in rotations if the enemy moves out of range or destroys it. Simply switching back to Albedo to drop another isn't always the best option since it'll waste time, and for characters like Ito or Zhao, you'll be forced to end their burst. So most of the time, if the blossoms are gone, you'll lose out on a lot of damage. His energy generation is also very bad and will need assistance if you want to use his burst. Albedo himself will not work with most buffers in the game aside from a select few. His burst will benefit from attack buffs, but his skill, which is his bread and butter, will have limiting supports. So, we have 2 new characters and 2 old ones. As always, we don't know the full potential of Nilou and Cyno, and it's always best to wait a couple days to a week after their release to fully understand their potential. That's of course if you're playing for meta. Nonetheless, we can still somewhat gauge how useful they can be, but the question is, who should you pull for out of the 4 characters? The top priority is Venti. Despite being the very first limited 5-star character way back when the game was first released, Venti is still very solid as a character. Yes, new enemies and bosses introduced makes Venti's burst less effective, but his CC is still the best in the game, and he can fit into almost any team thanks to his elemental shred and quick swap playstyle. Now obviously, if you're in need of a hyper carry, then he isn't for you, but for what he offers, it's totally worth it. Although his stupid burst sometimes shoots the wrong direction, regardless, he's still being used quite frequently in Abyss through multiple updates, meaning he has value, especially that crowd control. Now, like I said, Venti is top priority. If you're not looking for a hyper carry character, he's top pick because his utility is amazing, but if you want a main DPS character, then Cyno is a solid option. Not saying Nilou can't be a main DPS, but her function is best supported as a sub-DPS for bloom reactions. So, we don't know the full capabilities of Cyno just yet, but he does have a lot going against him. According to TCs, or Theory Crafters, there are two competitors for Cyno: the great almighty Raiden Shogun and Keqing. That's right, Keqing is on the board for comparison now. Never thought I'd see the day. With Dendro supports, all Electro DPS characters get a dramatic boost. There's a lot of back and forth about the comparison with Keqing. Keep in mind, it's a theory comparison based on a full team rotation, not a comparison on the individual characters. Regardless, just to summarize, Cyno's team damage is equivalent and sometimes lower than Keqing's damage within a team. Remember, teams, not individuals. She also doesn't rely on burst for electro-infused attacks, making her a bit easier to play. But another comparison is with Shogun, who is regarded as one of the best units in the game. Shogun at C2 is honestly no comparison. A comparison with C0 Shogun instead means Cyno can deal more damage than Shogun and aggravate team rotations, but damage isn't the only reason why she's amazing. She has good damage, an easy off-field electro enabler, has support capabilities such as burst buff and team energy charge. So the combination of all those is why Raiden is used a lot. For players who already own Raiden, Cyno may not be as desirable, especially if you can save your Primogems and money trying to pull for a C2 Shogun when she returns, or even go for C0 Shogun if you don't have her. Now, please understand, even if Raiden is superior, that doesn't mean Cyno is not good or that you shouldn't pull for him. Next character I'd recommend is Albedo. Now, I will say, if you have Zhongli and Albedo's limited event sword, I'd recommend him way over Cyno. Albedo and Zhongli synergizes amazingly and is how players typically use Albedo in Abyss. The Geo wave damage from Zhongli and Albedo's construct will deal consistent damage on top of the tick damage from his blossoms, and with Millilith attached to Zhongli, you'll have constant attack buffs supporting your main DPS. Now, if you don't have Zhongli or Albedo's signature weapon, he's okay but become less viable. This doesn't mean he's shit, but if you need an off-field DPS character, there are a lot of better options to choose from if you're using teams outside Geo. You could splash Albedo into teams, but his presence can't affect team resonance if there isn't another Geo character. With that logic, you're better off using someone else if Geo isn't the focus. Geo reactions also aren't that strong either, and most players would rather use offensive reactions like Vape, Melt, or Quicken. This means Albedo is not really a reaction-focused character, unlike Cyno, and as we know, Genshin is moving into an offensive reaction-heavy meta. But a large reason why Albedo is slightly below Cyno in terms of recommendation is because he isn't as future-proof. Most of his supports are limited and gone. His spindle sword is no longer available, Zhongli just passed and is limited, even Goro can be hard to obtain as a 4-star. But we know more Dendro characters are on their way, and Cyno has high potential to improve significantly, so you have to take that into consideration. Lastly is Nilou, who I would say has amazing potential. The main problem is her being locked into a very strict team build. This is the only reason why I would put her below Cyno. Again, there's really no team flexibility. Let's break it down real quick. You need Nilou herself and another Hydro character who should heal until they of course release a Dendro healer, but that's the future. So as of right now, that leaves you with Barbara and Kokomi. For the other two slots, you have two Dendro characters you can use, and that's Traveler and Kale. This will no doubt change in the future, especially with Nahida and other Dendro characters that will eventually be released, but now you're basically just hoping for a good Dendro character who can synergize with Nilou. I will say Nilou's team is really free-to-play friendly though, since you have Kale from the event, Traveler, and Barbara was also free in the past. So summarizing on who you should pull for, Venti is number 1 for his utility, next is Albedo only if you have his best weapon and Zhongli. Maybe you weren't able to pull for Albedo back then, so now's another chance. If you don't have his sword or Zhongli, then I'd recommend Cyno slightly above Albedo. Next is Cyno, who is a strong Electro DPS character, but has tough competitions when comparing entire teams and supports. But not everyone will have Keqing or Raiden, so he still has a place for use, especially if you need an Electro DPS. Besides, he looks awesome as hell. Nilou being last is because of the severe team restrictions. There is no doubt that both Cyno and Nilou will get better supports that will help make them stronger. But until then, this is my recommendation. Well, let me know who you're pulling for. Also, always remember to go for the characters you like or who can help with your specific account. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for future Genshin Impact videos. As always, everyone, good luck on your pulls. Till next time.